So in today's video, what I've gone ahead and done is I've ordered what should be enough parts to build a computer using AliExpress. Now, a bit of a backstory, I actually had an offer come up on AliExpress a little while ago where I could choose as many pick items as I want, get free postage, and it mostly just seemed to be bits of junk that sellers just wanted to get rid of. So I spent just under 20 quid on enough parts to build a computer. So it's time to find out what they actually sent me and if this is even a good idea, because these are apparently brand new parts. I don't know if I believe they're brand new parts, but let's get this thing open and we'll go through them bit by bit. Number one, well, this one says RZX DDR3 RAM. I think this was about just under £2 a pop for RAM. So let's see what we've got inside this one. It is a stick of RAM. It is RZX Gamer RAM. 8 gigs of it though, which is not too bad for DDR3. This is a pink one. This one says RepLab Consulting Limited, which is based in Wales. I don't think this is from Wales, but we'll find out. It does say Casper Gaming RAM for work, software, or playing game. And it is another stick of RAM. I don't know what I was expecting. I mean, it was always going to be a stick of RAM. So 16 gigs of RAM right there. Now we've got the big one here. Machinist H61 motherboard. Let's get this one open. And get some scissors on this one. Well, it's an actual box. Player exclusive Go Beyond to luxury motherboard. It's the original. It's got game assistant. It's tested. It's got strong CMPT, diamond quality, cyber security, computer acceleration, after sale warranty. When touching the motherboard, static electricity. Do not install the motherboard device when power is on. Before assembling, please consult customer services on whether my products are compatible with the motherboard. Let's see what it actually looks like. This was like the most expensive part. I think this was about £12. So what do we got? We got cardboard, SATA cable, and the board. It's using a Foxconn processor cover, M2 slot, USB 3. It needs a battery, which is fine, we've got plenty of those. It's got HDMI, VGA, and it's also got 6 USB ports and Ethernet and audio. 3 SATA ports. It's even got an I/O shield. But that by itself is useless without a processor to go in this. So what else have we got in here? We have got the i3-2120, it just straight up says that on here. This was £2. I did try and find better processors, but given I was stuck to what they were offering me on my discount bundle, this was the only one I could find. And there it is, stamped Core i3-2120. Apparently that is a whole system. So let's do a little tally up of what we've got. Motherboard, £12. We've also got DDR3, £1.96, and the gamer one, £2.60. So that is a complete setup there for under 20 quid. All that's really left to do is see if it actually does anything. So let's get this set up and actually build this into a real system. I've been meaning to do this for years, to be honest. Let's whack in the processor. Put in our Core i3. Now we do need a cooler of some sort. I do have a couple of coolers, but I ordered these a while ago. Now, once again, these are about £3 a pop. These are just generic coolers that I think mount to this motherboard. I mean, this is the John's Bow for your real needs. Is that thermal paste? Oh, well, we have to use the thermal paste it comes with in the little baking tube. It feels bitty. After having looked at this for a little bit, I think I figured it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. I only use John's Bow thermal paste these days. John's Bow thermal paste is where it's at. So we got the gamer RAM going in now. And now we just need a battery and to plug it into a power supply. Nothing, 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 nothing. Something turns straight on. And it's even got a UEFI BIOS, which means we can run modern graphics cards on this. It's very small. There is the entire setup. I'm a little bit amazed. So I've grabbed the cheap SSD, some cables for it. We've got the SATA cable that was included with the motherboard. It's even got USB support straight in the BIOS. So what have we actually got in the BIOS? You've got a lot of controls in here. RAM, and I believe we have an operating system on this USB stick. Not normal Windows 11, by the way, Windows 11 IoT, which is the best operating system I've used in years, because it's got nothing on it. Which one of these was power? I think power was these two. Well, I know when I last used this SSD, it was actually on. It was the £3 AMD motherboard setup. i3-2120, 4 CPUs, so 2 cores, 4 threads at 3.3 GHz, 16 gigs of RAM, and it's running Intel HD graphics. The RZX is just a Samsung stick, and the other one is unbranded. It's very quick. It works really well so far. Right, let's whack Windows 11 on here, and I will join back with you in a minute. Well, after quite easily putting Windows 11 on there, which was the IoT version, which means it comes with absolutely nothing, then genuinely that's why I like installing it on these systems, because I found it even more lightweight than most versions of Windows 10, which this PC should be able to handle being Sandy Bridge based, and when it came down to it, everything seemed to be working absolutely fine. But the main issue was the high CPU usage. Now, this could just be down to the fact we are using an older Core i3, but I was thinking, well, it should be running a little bit quicker than this. We have tested Sandy Bridge stuff quite frequently, maybe not the i3s, but it should be doing better. So what I decided to do was try and find some graphics drivers, because currently the processor is having to deal with the entire graphics side of the operating system, with no iGPU to understand it all. So what we've got is a basic dual-core processor with hyperthreading, trying to navigate its way through Windows 11 without anything to help it out with processing what's happening on screen. So what are we going to do about graphics drivers? Well, for those of you that don't know, Intel HD is what you got with your Intel processor, at least it was from the first generation of Core i series stuff, where you would actually be able to use Intel HD to render things on screen. And given this was the only processor that AliExpress would actually let into my discount bundle, and there were no graphics cards available in our price range, well, that does mean we are going to be using Intel HD 2000. Which means getting a hold of drivers is a monumental pain, because the last version they were officially released for was Windows 8, I believe? Genuinely, it's easier to find working older Intel GMA drivers for things like Windows XP and Windows 7 than it is to actually find working Intel HD drivers that will run on Windows 10 and 11. Now, don't be wrong, there are ways of getting them to work, but trying to get them to install is a monumental pain. Eventually, I did find a set that would work on Windows 8.1, and then after a bit of dabbling around with some compatibility options, they did install. Now our resolution, for some reason here, after installing the drivers, no longer works in 1440p, it tops out at just north of 1080p. But honestly, given that this actually is now working properly and the processor usage went down after doing this, it means the system is actually doing a little bit better. And did it do exactly that? Did it speed up the system? Well, given this was the cheapest fully working setup I could throw together off AliExpress, and this was the first time the system actually showed some promise in the world of modern computing. Now, don't get me wrong, we were able to surf the web and download some drivers on the system, we were using it, but once we actually had graphics drivers on there, things became a lot more snappy. I mean, they weren't bad before, but they were a lot quicker now. Now, don't get me wrong, doing something on your phone would still be quicker than using a system like this. But hey, it is getting us by, and this processor did cost us next to nothing. In fact, the main limit now wasn't the processor, it wasn't the graphics, everything was working for just general usage, and that means it's all good. The problem is, that doesn't mean we're not limited somewhere. In this case, it was the rear USB 2 ports, which usually I never complain about too much because USB 2, that's quick enough, you can load files and install things, it's never really too much of a problem. But here, the speed on the USB 2 ports was downright miserable. I tried changing things in the BIOS and it doesn't really do anything, and for actually just transferring files, it wasn't too slow, but if you're actually installing a game from it, take for example Crysis or Morrowind, it was taking quite a while to do it. So we've established a few things here. The system does actually work, it does run Windows 11, you can get drivers for it, and it will be able to actually install the programs you want, because I had a full suite of programs ready and installed, from games through to Steam. All the applications I needed were just working. And sure, our main complaint at the moment was the USB speed, but that is honestly such a minor gripe given that we do actually have a fully working USB 3 header, so if you put this thing in a case, this wouldn't really be much of a problem, just use your front ports. But one of our main limits after getting all of this out the way was just how useful is Intel HD in 2025. Now unfortunately, Intel HD 2000 really is just about the same as it used to be. Drivers have some features, but beyond basic display utilities, they aren't too featureful and they aren't too reliable. Yes, at some point I will take a proper look back at Intel HD because people have asked for years, can I look at Intel GMA, can I look at Intel HD? And honestly, after having made this video, I will do a proper look back on Intel HD. What was the performance like here though? Well, in 3D Mark it repeatedly crashed, but then again we are running an unsupported operating system with questionable drivers at best, but it still does what it was good at. When you load up some basic games, take for example Half-Life 2 with the original 2004 port, you can enjoy a quite comfortably scaled 1024x768 output with high settings across the board and a decent frame rate. So yes, Intel HD is terrible, but it can still do some things that it was good at. It can run those classic titles relatively well. From this point on though, I thought I had a bit of a got you moment because Intel HD always used to have one big trick up its sleeve. See, it wasn't great for gaming, even though we did have all of the enhancements turned on in the BIOS for it and gave it one whole gigabyte of DDR3 VRAM. See, one of the big draws for Intel HD back in the day was keeping it around to drive a second display that would enable it for Quicksync. The idea being you would power your second display for free off your iGPU, and then you could use the integrated graphics for recording whatever you wanted on screen. Sounds great, right? Well, unfortunately, OBS has dropped support for versions this old, and I'm sure with enough fiddling around you could get an older version to work, but I didn't have any luck with the versions I tried on Windows 11, even the versions that should be supported. The same can also be said for Handbrake, which wasn't able to even utilize or recognize that we had Quicksync support. So when it comes to the trump card I thought I finally had to present to you with why this might have a redeeming factor, I've got nothing. It could be Windows 11, it could be the dodgy drivers, it could just be that Intel HD is just too old to be supported for rendering video out that way. Either way, its best feature is now gone. So what can a PC built for 20 quid from AliExpress actually do? Well, as we've seen, general usage and just to get you by as a basic computer is fine here. I wasn't too surprised, but the quality of the parts is something we can test, and there wasn't any overheating, everything worked fine. I could leave it sitting on the desk for 48 hours just sitting on Chrome or something like that, and it has no problems doing that. It can handle general usage absolutely bang on fine. But I wanted to see if we could get away with doing anything on the system, and I was going to say, why don't we try and make a quick video? But the problem is, now that we can't do Quicksync, it means that we have to use the processor with just 2 cores to do all of the recording, which led to some less than stellar results. In the end, we managed to settle on some rather mediocre 360p footage, but we could at least manage a high refresh rate. The whole high FPS capture of 50 frames per second, but still, we were able to get through a round of recording and edit it all down on the PC, and I can comfortably say, honestly, for editing up to 720p basic high definition footage, it wasn't a half bad experience, and it can still manage it okay provided you use relevant software. So for reliving your Intel HD gameplay video dreams, you can comfortably remake the experience bang on one-on-one with a PC like this. In fact, it'll handle up to basic 720p editing pretty much perfectly, and you can keep it in the authentic 360p export resolution just to make sure it's almost as if you're back in 2011 again. Also, on a really boring note, yes, the output audio from this £12 motherboard actually works perfectly. So audio in, audio out, yes, it's very basic 3.5mm, but it does work perfectly fine, which is always nice to see. Now, one question on most people's minds is, now you've got a setup like this that works, can you take it any further? Can you put in a graphics card? Now, admittedly, I didn't get a graphics card off AliExpress as there were literally none available when I was doing this bundle deal, and it comes up with the options you get to pick. And it has a very limited search criteria, and I looked and looked and looked, and there was no graphics cards at all. So what we're going to do today is we're going to whack in this Radeon 6700 XT, because it's kind of a good test, because this is a brand new, or relatively brand new graphics card that requires a UEFI BIOS, and by extension, a relatively modern computer to work properly. But mysteriously, thanks to the bodges implemented by the makers of this motherboard, it works absolutely fine. In fact, all modern cards seem to work absolutely fine with this old 1155 socket motherboard. And yes, drivers were a bit slow to install and they were a bit fiddly, and this was a combination of the processor being so slow that it was installing drivers itself in the background, and of course myself downloading and installing more up-to-date drivers at the same time. But once we managed to get that mess out of the way, did a few things manually, it was working bang on okay. Whether you want to blame that on the system being slow or you want to blame it on Windows 11, that's your choice, but we did in fact everything all up and running. So what else is wrong? We've got a graphics card, we've got drivers, we've got a system. Why aren't we at the benchmarks already? Well, I would be in the benchmarks by now, and I had started filming that segment. But those USB 2 ports are so unbelievably slow that they were just giving me issues I've never seen before. Loading into games from Steam, despite the fact that most modern games need to compile caches and things like that, which takes an eon to do on a Core i3, getting to that point alone was painfully slow because of how limiting the USB 2 ports are. So it gave us the opportunity to test something else. See, the game drive, where I have all of my Steam games, is actually just an M2 SSD in an enclosure, which means that we can take that out and directly insert it into the computer, meaning we can test the M2 slot. And miraculously, after a quick bodge in, we didn't even screw it down or anything, we had a fully working M2 SSD in the PC. And I wasn't actually expecting it to work, but it was genuinely about 10 times quicker than those slow USB ports. So let's answer, I don't know how useful this question we're going to answer is, if you spend £20 on PC parts from AliExpress, build yourself a very basic computer, should you bung in a graphics card and find out what it can actually do in the questionable AliExpress benchmarks? Starting things off, we have Grand Theft Auto 5 with the Enhanced Edition running with normal settings in 1080p. Now unfortunately, any higher settings or any ray tracing would put so much strain on the processor of the system that you really just couldn't get away with anything other than normal settings, which was a bit of a shame to see, but then again it is quite a new title, and it was nice to see that it could at least launch it. The graphics card spent most of its time doing absolutely nothing, as you'd expect, and really is completely overkill, so you already know what to expect for the rest of the benchmarks. Either way, it was nice to see that you can launch the game and achieve a playable frame rate, just use a more sensible graphics card that's probably more matched to the system. But still, the RAM was fine, the processor was fine, and thermals were also okay. If you move things back a little bit to GTA Online with the legacy version, one thing that I did notice happened quite a lot was that when you actually went out into a lobby, the system seemed to be so slow that most of the players would leave and you'd be booted into your own session, which did help the frame rate, as in a fully populated lobby, you were seeing anywhere from 8 to 12 FPS, sometimes peaking around 15 FPS. So GTA Online is playable with the legacy version, but once again, lower settings only, 1080p resolution. The graphics card will mostly do absolutely nothing, but you are limited to playing in groups of around 5 to 16 at maximum. It should come as no surprise that Counter-Strike 2 is an interesting game to benchmark, and it was able to achieve an almost playable frame rate throughout the Workshop benchmark map, with 53 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 32 FPS. Now in actual game scenarios, when you're playing competitive with fewer players on the map and less happening, you could see anywhere from 50 to 80 FPS a lot of the time. So Counter-Strike 2 was actually remarkably playable, so not that I'm advocating to get into a system like this for Counter-Strike, but given it is one of the most popular games out there, you can just about get away with playing it on what is a system that you could throw together for 20 quid. All you'd need to do is throw in a somewhat okay graphics card and you're fine to play the game. Now, what you're probably thinking is, a game that would run on this system and will actually run with the integrated graphics as well, is RimWorld. And as much as the new 1.6 update has helped with multi-threading, when you've only got 2 cores, it doesn't really do much to help performance. So in medium-sized colonies, even when it is a normal-sized map, speeding up the game will drag your frame rate down to 15 FPS. Yes, the tick rate will improve compared to some slower processors, but it is still going to be a relatively slow experience. So you can play RimWorld on a system like this, even on the iGPU, but you're going to be better off sticking to small colonies without much happening.
older titles like Fable The Lost Chapters are an area where this Core i3 does remarkably well. Now yes, this is mostly a test of single core performance once again, given that Fable really only uses one core and glosses over hyper-threading slightly, but still we saw 79 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 61 FPS when there were lots of particle effects going on and the processor was having to calculate lots of NPCs and things like that. So Fable The Lost Chapters and a lot of those classic games from the early 2000s run perfectly fine on the Core i3 and really aren't a struggle for it when it comes to single-threaded performance. Now, Skyrim Anniversary is a little bit more of a struggle, but it's also the type of thing that you would be expecting to run on a Sandy Bridge i3. Now, it was more targeted towards the Core i5s and things like that back in the day, and it does run okay here. Towns and cities would see your frame rate between 30 to 40 FPS, but when you're actually out in the open or in a cave or house or somewhere more enclosed, you could be seeing anywhere from 40 to 60 FPS. So Skyrim Anniversary is playable, and it was the first time we were actually able to put the settings up to high. But finally, can it run Crysis? Well, it must be admitted the 6700 XT definitely has some frame pacing issues when you first launch the game, so not all of this can actually be blamed on 20 quid's worth of parts from AliExpress. We can blame part of this on a £200 graphics card, which is not a sentence I thought I'd be saying in this video. Either way, Crysis does run remarkably well on a system like this, given it can only use 2 cores, and that's bang on what we've got in this system. So for those older titles from 2008 to 2010 as well, you know, the types of titles that really only target 2 cores at maximum, well, they are sort of the best experience you will get on a system like this. Just remember, you won't be playing this on the Intel HD included with the system. Now, overall performance is definitely something interesting to look at, as really, the Radeon card did absolutely nothing. In fact, it was very rare that the fans even turned on, and if they did, it was for a split second when the game was loading and it was pushing some stupid frame rate in the high hundreds. When you were actually in-game, the graphics card had nothing to do at all. So I don't really know what to take away from the performance here. It's not really a test of the Core i3 because I've not set things up properly in a way that's repeatable for benchmarks and designed purely to stress just the processor. But what we have seen is if you build yourself a £20 system and whacked in a probably more appropriate graphics card like a 750 Ti or a 1050 Ti or an RX 470, something along those lines, you'd likely have a relatively okay gaming experience. Now don't get me wrong, you would be better off moving away from that Core i3, and I think we're definitely going to have to be looking at that at some point soon to find out what it is actually capable of and how much it was limiting us. But yes, the system can game, temperatures are fine, the board handles the power delivery fine, and it even handles a high power graphics card being in there, which if anything is more relevant than the real benchmarks actually are. Now I suppose I could talk about thermals and power consumption, but there isn't anything exciting to talk about. I tried stressing the processor, it tops out at 40-50 degrees. The actual cooler seems relatively decent, so there weren't any problems with VRM temperatures, voltage spikes. There was nothing exciting to report in terms of thermals or power consumption. The entire system under full load maybe used about 45 watts with everything plugged in, and then when you inserted a graphics card and it was under full load there, or at least as high of a load as it could be, it went up to just shy of 100 watts, around 96 watts. So it's not very entertaining to talk about thermals and power consumption, but for those of you that are worried, everything here seems perfectly stable. So there we have it, building the closest we can get to a whole computer using the AliExpress bargain bundle thing that they offered me one morning, and I thought, you know what, why not? Why don't we build an entire computer for 20 quid? But the motherboard is probably the standout here because it is excellent. I'm sure that there are definitely versions of this that have QA problems and probably some issues with testing, but the version that I received, for at least as cheap as I got it, it is probably one of the better 1155 boards I've got. No, it's not going to blow you away with the quality of VRMs or things like that. It is a £14 motherboard. My main issue with it is the USB ports are bad and they are slow, and I found no way to make them better. Yes, a USB 3 header might be a good idea, and if you whack this in a case that would be a negligible problem. I'm trying to think what else I could comment on it, other than people are going to comment on the VRM quality and say, oh, you're better off with a used Asus board. Yes, but let's say you're in a region of the world that can't get it and importing one of these works out cheaper. Well, how many hospitals have you been to where they have a dusty old Vigeland Pentium D system that has no power saving turned on, drawing 130 watts, and has been running the same way for 20 years? VRMs are a problem, but they are definitely overblown in certain situations, and I can see this being one of those situations. The CPU cooler, it's excellent for how cheap it was. I mean, it's not exactly doing anything strenuous with that Core i3, but it does work, and the mounting is a lot nicer than Intel's push pins. The RAM, perfect, cheaper and more reliable than anything locally I've found, and cost me £4 in total, or somewhere around that figure, so that was interesting to see that the core parts of this build are good. The main issue is the processor, because it was just struggling, and I think we do need to take a good look at Sandy Bridge Core i3s to find out, are they obsolete, because they very well might be. Honestly though, this doesn't seem like too bad of an idea. Maybe I got lucky, but given how well these things are selling and my experience ordering from China so far, maybe if you just want a cheap bundle, or maybe if you're struggling to get cheap parts, these could actually end up being a good idea. So keep an eye out for those vouchers or those bundle deals, and maybe grab one yourself, who knows. I hope this has been somewhat helpful. This has been as honest as I can be. I've just taken it out of the box and tested it. So thank you very much for watching, and good night.